First and foremost, I want to say call halal, but now Yahweh Hashem, Hamashiach Yahushai. This is Yahushai Ban Yahushai from the Sakari Sect of Dallas. Coming to you with a quick little video lesson on pretty much speeding up the process of us getting out of here and how we do that. How we speed up the process of us getting out of captivity, America, aka Babylon, and getting back to our homeland, which is Israel, right? Because I brought this out in a lesson not too long ago, the last lesson that I brought out in Dallas, actually, and I touched on it a little bit, but I didn't really go too deep into it, and so I wanted to further expound on what I was talking about when I was going into this little section of the lesson that I was going into in the street. So I'm going to start off here, Deuteronomy chapter 30. It says, "And it shall come to pass, when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse," right? The blessing and the curse that's talked about in Deuteronomy 28, right? The blessing, if we obeyed the Most High's commandments, right? He would bless us. If we disobeyed him, right? You read from verse 15 all the way to 68 of curses that will come upon us and overtake us. They will be a sign and a wonder upon the descendants of the people of Israel, right? That's what it's talking about right here. It says, "When all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations, whither the Lord thy God had driven thee," right? So real quick, in the NET, this same verse says this, right? When you have experienced all these things, both the blessings and the curses I have set before you, you will reflect upon them in all the nations where the Lord your God has banished you, right? And that's what we're doing in these last days, right? Our people are reflecting upon them, right? You have people waking up, right? Starting with I think it was Ben Ami, right? Who was one of the first brothers to actually understand through the curses of Deuteronomy that he was an Israelite, and he convinced a multitude of other Israelites to actually go into Africa. And I mean, now today they have their own community in Israel, right? In Dimona, Israel, right? And you have other Israelites that have followed that same type of that follow that same way of going about getting out of this captivity, right? But that's what would happen in these last days. Are people reflecting upon the curses, realizing who we are, right? Like it says in Baruch. Let me get that real quick, just to clear it up. This is Baruch, and it says in verse 30, verse 29 and 30, right? "For I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people. But in the land of their captivities they shall remember themselves," right? Because when we remember these curses, we remember who we are. These curses tell us who we are. We're the Israelites the Bible speaks of, right? And who are they? The so-called blacks, native Indians, and Latino, Hispanics, right? Now going back to the Deuteronomy 30, it goes on to say, after "whither the Lord thy God hath driven thee," verse 2, "and shalt return unto the Lord thy God, and shalt obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day," right? So after we remember who we are and we start to keep the commandments that are contained in the law, it says, "thou and thy children with all thine heart and with all thy soul," right? So I went into this part briefly, but I didn't expound the way I wanted to. So I'm gonna go ahead and touch on it a little bit about what I was meaning when I said, and it's not just the generation that's waking up, but it's also going to be their children, right, that answer this call to repentance, and they keep the commandments as well. And as it says in verse 3, that then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God has scattered thee. Right? So when I said in that lesson before, pretty much it's not going to be just the generation that's waking up, but it's also going to be their children's generation. Right? What I was trying to go into, and what I was trying to pretty much the point I was trying to make was that we're actually going to be able to tell when we're about to get out of captivity based off what it's saying right here, right? We're going to be able to tell when we as Israelites, the Israelites who are waking up to this truth and are keeping the commandments, right? We're going to start to be able to see that our salvation is near and our returning to our land out of captivity is near when we see our children, when we see the children of the Israelites that are waking up, right? That generation actually keeping the commandments, right? Now I'm gonna say this. I know that there's been Israelites back, like with during Ben Amin's time, and then you have, all throughout the commandment keepers and the different sects that arose from the One West school of thought, and then you have all these camps now, right? I'm not saying that the brothers that were part of that movement didn't have children, right? I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the generation that's going to actually come out of captivity, what I was trying to say was the generation that's coming out of captivity is going to be the generation that came from a household where they were taught to keep the law, right? And that's really not our generation, the generation that I come from. And I know that because not to dishonor my father or anything, but the household that I grew up in, I even grew up, in a house with my father for the most part, right? I grew up, I was raised by a Chinese dude passing for Jamaican, right? According to the curse of in Deuteronomy 28, verse where it says in verse 41, thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them. Right? You won't be able to enjoy spending time with them and raising them. Right? It goes on to say, for they shall go into captivity. Right? That was my lifestyle. Right? I got, I got sent away. And in that household being raised by heathens, I didn't, they didn't raise me to keep the law of the Most High God. Right? I had to wake up to that truth by hearing the prophets out on the street. Right? By hearing other brothers that had to wake up to it in their lifetime. Right? But by reading this, we can understand that the generation that's going to come up out this captivity is going to be that generation that they can testify and say that their parents raised them in this truth. Right? Their parents raised them in this truth. They were keeping the commandments. Right? That's that generation you see standing outside, and you go up and you ask them, well, how'd you come into this truth? And they say, oh, my parents raised me in this. Right? It's going to be that generation of brothers and sisters, where their children are out, they grow up and end up holding camp. Right? That generation. All right? Those generation of brothers and sisters that are raised in polygynous households. Right? Because the generation that came up before them was so deeply involved in their customs, right, contained in the law of Moses, right, that we produced a whole generation of children that are just raised in the truth. Raised in the truth, knowing that they're Israelites, keeping the law with the faith of Yahushua. Right? And that generation is going to be the generation to come out of here. Right? So like the commandment was given in the beginning to the first people that were created in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26. And God said, let us make man in our image, after the image of our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them. And God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. Right? We got to continue to have children in this truth. Right? Make those babies, right? And raise them up in the truth. Although you Israelites that are in the truth, right? We gotta keep doing that. Right? Be fruitful and multiply, according to this commandment. Right? And what are we gonna and so this commandment can be carried out right here. As it says, and this is Deuteronomy chapter 4, and this is verse 9. Only take heed to thyself and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things which thy eyes have seen, and lest they depart from thy heart all the days of thy life, but teach them thy sons and thy sons' sons. Right? We got to teach our sons. Right? And going on, it says in Deuteronomy chapter 6, it says in verse 7, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. Right? We got to get our children as involved as we are right now. Like you brothers and sisters that's in the truth, we gotta really implant this truth into our children's heads. Because they're going to be the generation that the Most High sees and has compassion on us and turns our captivity. Right? That's going to be the generation that the Most High sees and he sends Yahweh Shai. Right? As it says in Psalms. This is Psalms. Get this real quick. Psalms 78 and verse 5. It says, I'm going to read verse 4. It says, we will not hide. Verse 3. It says, hold on. Salakia. I'm going to start at verse 1. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, shewing to the generation to come the praises of the Lord, and his strength and his wonderful works that he had done. For he established a testimony in Jacob, right? And appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children. Right? And if there was any other time to do it better, if there was any better time to do it, right? It would be right now. Right? While we're waking up in this truth, these brothers you got that zeal, that fire for the Lord, waking up in this truth. You out there standing on the streets. You out there passing out flyers. Right? You see the sisters coming into the truth. Right? Take you a wife. Right? Now we know there's stipulations for soldiers in Sakari. Right? But take you a wife. Right? Fight for that right, even if you're a soldier in Sakari. Right? Do your due diligence. Do your study. And the Most High, he'll give you the increase eventually, right? But we got to raise these children up, this next generation up in this truth. Because that's going to be the generation, man. That's going to be the generation. If we raise them up the right way, that's going to be the generation that the Most High sees, and he brings us up out of this captivity. As it goes on to say, it says that the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children. That the generation, I'm going to keep verse 7, it says, that they might set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and might not be as their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that set not their heart aright, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God. Right? And this next generation, they're going to be that generation that's going to set their hope in God. We're supposed to teach them to set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. Right? And as it says in Deuteronomy chapter 30, when we go back, right? It says, and shalt return unto the Lord thy God, and shalt obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children with all thy heart and with all thy soul, that then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee. Right? And remember what he said, thou and thy children with all thy heart and with all thy soul. So it's going to be that generation that, you know, that them and their father is in this truth. Right? Them and their children is in this truth. Right? Going on, it says, with all thine heart and with all thy soul, that then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God has scattered thee. Right? And that's when he's going to send Yahushua back. Right? Because how is he going to gather us? How did Yahushua say the Most High is going to gather us out of captivity? This is Matthew 24. This is Matthew 24 right here. In verse 30, it says, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. That's how we're going to be gathered out of this place. When that generation, right, that's raised in this truth, by their fathers that are in this truth, right? When they start to obey the Most High God and keep his commandments with all their heart and with all their soul, and he has compassion on us, right? We want that to be this generation that we're raising right now. We want this right here to be what happens to the generation that comes from us brothers that's laboring in this truth right now. Right? Because we want to get out this captivity. Right? We see that the Most High is waiting for us to get it right. He's waiting for us to get it right. To keep these commandments, to repent. Right? So we got to speed up that So if you want to speed up the process of getting out of this captivity, you got to bear children and you got to raise them up the right way. All right? But just to finish the whole point, and let it be done. This is Isaiah. This is Isaiah 45:4. For Jacob my servant's sake and Israel mine elect. That's the elect that's going to be gathered from the four corners. Right? I have even called thee by thy name. I have surnamed thee, though thou hast not known me. Right? But now it's time for us to get to know the Most High, us and our children, so we can get the hell up out this captivity. Right? And with that, I'm going to say, Call Halal Abanau Yahweh Shema Mashiach Yahushai. and Shalom.